Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Jin. First of all, for me, it's a great honour to be here at this conference, and it's great as well to see so many of you here at this late session in the conference. My name is John Dunne, and I work for the Central Statistics Office, or the CSO here in Ireland. The CSO is a national statistics agency, and its role is really to provide an information system for the state. Today, I want to give you a flavour of how statistical agencies operate in the data society today. To give you a flavour of, say, welcome to the world of official statistics. So, but first some context in terms of the role of a statistical agency. Okay, we all know about the right to privacy, okay? But also, in a modern democratic state, or in the democratic state of today, we also want to be governed in an open and transparent way, okay? That brings trust in our government. And then there's also a third pillar. That's also the right to be able to live in an informed society so that we can make intelligent decisions. Both government can make intelligent decisions and Joe public can make intelligent decisions, okay? And in terms of official statistics, the UN, there are principles governing official statistics under the UN guidelines. And primarily among those, there are principles with respect to confidentiality and limited of the purpose of collecting data to statistical purposes. These rights and principles are typically then enshrined in three pillar pieces of legislation. The first one we're familiar with. The second one, open and transparency of freedom of information legislation, which typically applies to government bodies. And then the third one is statistical legislation. In Ireland, we have the Statistics Act. And then there's also an overarching one at a European level, which is called EU 223/2009. So what type of information do we produce in the system? I think our mandate to produce statistics covers really anything and everything: environment, business, economy, and society. The most well-known one, and probably the most used, is the Census of Population. In 2016, our census enumerated 4.7 million people in 1.7 million households living in Ireland. That census cost us 50 million euros, or just over 10 euros for every man, woman and child. We conduct a traditional census when we do our census, and the bulk of the cost is associated with data collection. We visit every household effectively. So that's really the traditional approach to how we collect statistics. So what we do is we design a data collection, we go out then and we collect that data, we process it, analyze it, create a statistical product and disseminate it out. This approach is costly in terms of data collection. It's what we call designed data. And there's also a significant lead-in time to when we have data available to be able to produce statistics from. However, there's another type of data source we call secondary data sources, or organic data, that if we can take advantage of that data that already exists or created for other purposes, we get significant benefits. This approach is effectively recognized and promoted in the statistical principles and official statistics principles, and already there in legislation. So with this in mind, in 2009, the CSO set up the Administrative Data Centre with two objectives. One, to act as a clearinghouse for these secondary data sources, which are primarily the data held in other government systems or other government public bodies around the system, and bring that into the CSO to be able to use for statistical purposes. And also to act as a catalyst to develop the Irish statistical system. That's also to drive that data forward to better inform policy and decision making. By the way, that's not to say the CSO didn't use administrative data before 2009. But in summary, this is a kind of a diagram we use to describe what the ADC does. While the nature of the relationships between ourselves and the government bodies was never really this bad, but it kind of highlights just, you know, the different kind of nature of relationships if you don't have a clearinghouse or a hub or a gateway with which to collect that data. It can become very difficult and complicated to manage the relationships. So what we did in 2009 is we brought in and we set up what we call the Administrative Data Centre, which acts as that clearinghouse with all the necessary safeguards and such in place. We also regularly review and upgrade our systems in terms of privacy as we go. I should say one of the benefits in hindsight that we had in setting this up is we took a privacy by design approach to setting it up in the first place, which has greatly helped us now with respect to the GDPR. Probably part of that is confidentiality and privacy is pretty much in the DNA of people working with official statistics. They're very, very concerned about protecting the trust that people have of data providers and not betraying that trust. But in terms of promoting the Irish statistical system and developing it, we looked across the public sector and we identified opportunities such that if we can make the data smarter in all these government databases, we could have greater statistical value for a much lower cost to the taxpayer. Okay, and so what do we mean by smarter data? What we really mean by smarter data is to be able to use official identification numbers across the system for persons, businesses and property. The statistical value in this approach is best illustrated in the Nordic countries, where they actually, instead of conducting a traditional census, they conduct a virtual census and they do it every year. And Denmark in itself claims it can do a census every day with just the push of a button, by just collecting the data out of these government systems and counting the interactions of people with the state. But smarter data is not just for statistics, if you think about it. It'll also enable more efficient and effective public administration. E-government services spring to mind automatically. Smarter data also enables safer data. And one obvious example there is it enables the possibility to be able to implement audit trails on government systems across the place. There's none of this putting your name in Irish or putting your name in English and people not knowing if this person is this person or that person is that. If you look up somebody's identification on a system, there's an audit trail there that unambiguously identifies you as having looked up this person's details. Now, a few examples of the type of work statistical offices are doing with this type of smarter data that we talk about. I should say smarter data has also been taken into the heart of public service reform here in Ireland. I think primarily driven from around 2011 and 2012 as a key driver of transformation in the public sector. But moving on, we've taken a first step towards developing our virtual census is to be able to estimate the population in the state. So what we've done, we've taken a signs of life approach where we identify evidence that somebody is alive, that they've engaged with the state, and counted up all these interactions to give us a count of the population of the state. That's our observed population, which is the dashed line. The target population we're trying to identify, though, is those living in the state. So we have to then apply new methods or statistical methods to be able to adjust or calibrate that information out to be able to estimate the population. So this is just some of the primary work we're doing. We should be able to push out these type of population estimates on an annual basis, which may also help to reduce the requirement for us to conduct our traditional census. At the moment, we do one every 5 years. If we're successful with this, we'll push it out to 10 years, and if we can get down to geographical detail, we may be able to move to a virtual census completely. By the way, the team working on this project never had access to identifiable information. They only worked with pseudonymized data at all stages. A second example occurs whereby in 2009, you all know our economy took a nosedive. There was a huge demand for information, particularly around dynamics in the labour market. This particular slide just shows the destruction in construction jobs, particularly for young males. The green is the number of jobs that were there in 2008, and the pink is 2009 using a population pyramid style. This uses a linked employer-employee data file, all secondary data. We were able to react very fast to this requirement for information when the demand came. It wouldn't have been possible through the use of surveys. It also allows us to see where those that lost jobs, were they transitioning into other jobs or were they going on to unemployment benefit? Again, the project team working on this never actually saw any identifiable information. They were always working on protected data. A third example is if we take that data set and link it up with the higher education data, or those that receive awards, we can also see then what we call policy outcomes with respect in the higher education area, so that we have a picture now of what happens to people after they graduate. So if there's a change in policy or something like that, now we can see what happens before and after picture. So we now have that capability as well. So this is all bringing in smarter data, is bringing all this capability into the statistical system. Yeah, okay. So quickly, what this does, it turns our resource pyramid upside down, and instead we spend very little time on collecting, and now we can spend a lot more time on analysing and publishing our information. So I'm told now I'm a little bit tight for time, but there's also a new type of data sources coming on, the so-called big data. And we're also very interested in that, and I note from Gordon's presentation earlier that he also referenced satellite data. But there's other types. There's mobile phone data, which can give us information about tourism, daytime, nighttime type populations, transport, mobility, and so forth. I have satellite imagery there also, which we could use as a quality control on maybe a census of buildings in the state, where you can identify buildings, or on registers. Finally, and just pushing this through, in the Nordic countries, they developed this approach to smarter data in the 60s. They had this idea of registers, this object space time approach, and the idea of registers and a statistical archive system, and it was very successful. But a similar initiative also occurred in the States in the 60s, and it's quite interesting to go back and read through that. There's a great paper in the Journal of Privacy and Confidentiality about this initiative. But it also, some of the headlines from that time on the papers, but there's also a great article by a guy called Arthur R. Miller, and he was a privacy legal expert at that time, leading expert at that time. And the arguments he put forward in that article are very much relevant to where we are today when we're talking about these new data sources. But then they were talking about administrative data sources. So, again, just to sum up a little bit, there's huge value in the reuse of organic or secondary data, and that's where we need to move as a statistical office. Data governance is key to everything, with trust, privacy and cost are issues to be very much considered. We also have a tradition of privacy engineering in official statistics and mining privacy as we go. I think we also need to put a lot more investment into that in order to make sure that we retain that trust that people have in how we collect data and produce our statistics. And also finally, there's a few references that we have, and I'd just like to finish by summing up by saying, for us, smarter data, for everybody, smarter data provides this enhanced information. Enhanced information enables for more focused and better decision making. And more focused decision making then leads for better outcomes for all of us. Thank you. At that time.